Okay, so now that we've achieved the intersection lines, split them, and put them on their own layers, now what we need to do is pipe every single one of these curves. So now I'm going to create another layer, and I'm going to call it left notch pipe. I'm going to change it to green, so that way we know the consistency there. And I'm going to create another layer, and I'm going to call this one right notch pipe. And I'm going to make it orange. And let's just work with one now, for now. So let's deal with our right pipes first. So the command, let me make sure to actually select the right layer. So I'm going to select the left notch pipe. And the command we're going to use is pipe. So you type in pipe. And then it's going to ask you a question here in the command line. Select curve to create pipe around. What we're going to choose is multiple because we have more than one here. More than one curve to deal with. So I'm going to type multiple, or hit multiple. And then now it's asking select curves to create pipes around. So I'm just going to real quickly select all of those because that's everything we need on this layer. And I'm going to hit enter. And now it's asking what's the thickness, the thickness of our pipe. And right now it has a radius. I'm going to change it to diameter. I'm going to make the caps flat. And I think I'm going to leave thick as no. I'm going to change the diameter to this. And this is something that's really intuitive to what material you're using. If you're using something thick, like this, you want to measure how thick this material is. So that way your notches will be the right thickness when you try to interlock these together. If you're using something really thin like this, then you should do a really thin notch, right? Because you don't want all the extra space on either side of the notch. I mean, and I'll revert back to the example I have here. If you were doing a paper thin model, you would see how much space is on either side of this notch, right? But if this had some kind of thickness, let me just add thickness for clarity's sake, and let's make it a 1/16 of an inch thick. And I'm going to do it on both sides, so it's actually going to be an 1/8 inch thick. You see how thick that is, right? So these notches aren't appropriate because they are way smaller than the material that we would use. So if you're using a material that was 1/8 of an inch thick, you would need to make sure your notches are an 1/8 of an inch thick as well. So that way when you intertwine these two things together, the thickness is correct. Something like this is not an 1/8 of an inch thick, right? This is probably a 1/16, even less. This might be somewhere between like a 32nd of an inch thick. It's really thin. My suggestion is don't do any notches smaller than a 1/16. The laser cutter just won't read it. It'll try to laser cut something and it'll do 2 lines over the top of itself, and you probably won't get a good result. 1/16 is probably the smallest you want to do. And then depending on how thick your material is that you're laser cutting with, that's how thick you want to make these notches. I'm expecting it to be out of material like this, so I'm going to do 1/16. So that way it's the smallest notch possible. If I asked you guys to do it out of foam core, which I don't think you can laser cut foam core because it'll catch on fire, then I would ask you to make notches that are this thick, which is probably 3/16 or an 1/8, or maybe even this is a 1/4. I'm not quite sure how thick this is. I'd have to measure it with an actual scale. But so that's just something to keep in mind. You always got to think about what you want your material to be when you're going to make your model, and you want to make your notches the thickness of the material. So now let me go back to our version here. And I said I wanted to use a material that was really thin, paper thin like this. So I want our notches to be a 1/16, right? So I'm going to make the pipe diameter 1/16. So I'm going to type that in, 1/16 of an inch. I'm going to hit enter. And so if I zoom in on one of these pipes and I check the distance of it, and let's see here. Let me turn on my quadrant so I can check quadrant to quadrant. It's a 1/16. So that's what I asked for. If you were doing an 1/8 inch material, you'd want to make all these pipes 1/8 of an inch. If you were doing something that was even thicker, like 1 inch material, if you were building a life-size version of this thing that's going to fill up this entire room, and your material is plywood, and you have 1 inch thick plywood or 3/4 inch thick plywood, these notches would need to be 3/4 of an inch thick or in diameter. So just keep that kind of in mind, that these pipes are going to change size based off of material. I just want that to be super clear about that. So our material is really thin, 1/16 will do. So I've got all of the pipes for this side, so now let's do the same for the other side. So I'm going to turn on the other curves here, and I'm going to select the other pipe layer, and I'm going to turn these ones off so they're not in our way. I'm going to do the same exact steps again. Pipe, multiple, select the pipes. It should already preset all the information, 1/16 for our diameter, cap flap, it's got everything the same. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and it's created those for us. So if I turn on both, now you see we've turned our intersection line, we've split it, turned it into a pipe, and now we have our surface or our pipe that we can then split from our panels. So I'm going to stop this video here, and let me just turn on these so you can see sort of the evolution of what's going on here.